Hello, all you radical earthlings. This is the Show Guys podcast, and we analyze movies, games, books, anime, and all of the above without the fear of gatekeeping.
I'm Logan.
And I'm Derek, and this is the Show Guys. Welcome, everyone, back to the Show Guys. Today we've got a very special first start for our anime journey, and we're going to be talking about Shonen Anime, which really is the most popular form of anime. Logan, would you like to specify what exactly Shonen is?
Thank you, Derek. The Oxford definition of shonen is, quote, a genre of Japanese comics and animated films aimed primarily at a young male audience, typically characterized by action-filled plots. And like you said, it is the best-selling form of manga and anime that there is. And for a lot of animation fans of our generation who grew up in the late 90s and the early 2000s, this genre was our introduction to Japanese animation and helped turn us into the animation fans we are today.
Thank you. Yeah, so really, you kind of nailed it on the head there with the whole what we grew up with was our first introduction to shonen anime or even anime in general. Why do you think shonen is so popular? And I guess for our listeners, we should probably specify that we're going to be talking about really the first three main shonen anime, which would be Fist of the North Star, Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, Dragon Ball Super, like that whole series, and then Yu Yu Hakusho and Togashi. So why do you think those are so popular, especially now? Because you have, and we'll talk about this here in a little bit, you have My Hero, you have Attack on Titan, you have stuff like that now to where it's classified as shonen. Why do you think these are so popular?
I feel that one of the main reasons that they're so popular and that so many people keep coming back to, especially some of the more seminal works like what we're going to talk about here in a moment, is that one of the big reasons is that they're really good at getting the blood pumping. If you need some kind of adrenaline rush or you just in general want to watch or read something exciting, it's really tough to beat some of the best shonen manga or anime out there. I mean, when you are right in the middle of a major battle between a protagonist and one of the antagonists of a really good shonen work, it's really hard to put down the manga volume, to pause the episode in progress, because you just become so invested into how great this action scene is playing out. And you really are interested in seeing the protagonist come out on top, which, of course, in manga and anime like this is more often than not. But it's still always really, really cool to experience that. What about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and we kind of talked about this being our first experience when we talk about shonen anime. I have to bring up Dragon Ball Z and Fist of the North Star because those, even though anime's been around since 1950, if you were to put it back on the timeline, those were the big shonen style animes, and that's what we grew up with. Was every Saturday we were watching the new episode of Yu Yu Hakusho or Dragon Ball Z. But I think it's because we focused on the whole good versus bad and also just the story. You think about it, if you think about it, we all watched cartoons as kids and they were Bugs Bunny, Looney Tunes, which no discredit to them, they were awesome. But what was the actual show? Then we see something like Dragon Ball Z, which is very unheard of over here in the United States. Anime didn't come to the United States until about 1963. Did you know what the first anime or the first shonen anime was?
What was it, my friend?
So I was doing a little research. In 1952, there was a manga series called Tetsuwan Atom. This was the first shonen anime in Japan. It follows the story of Adam the robot boy as he fights threats to himself and those around him. He's like a crusader of justice. This was brought over in 1963 with NBC, and the American title of it, Astro Boy. And they chose Astro Boy rather than Mighty Atom because actually there's no reason. They were just like, oh, we want to change it. So instead of Mighty Atom, Astro Boy had a better fit to it. So I thought that was interesting. I don't have too much experience with Astro Boy, to be completely honest, but to for that to be the gateway to Dragon Ball Z. I watched Dragon Ball Z for the first time. I think that was in 2012. I know that's very recent for someone who loves anime. I just never got around to it. And then my buddy was like, okay, you have to watch all of the Dragon Ball series. So I spent the entire summer, I mean, from May to August, watching Dragon Ball to Dragon Ball Z. I tried to watch Dragon Ball GT, but, but let's be honest, it's not as good. There's some thoughts that I have, and we'll get to it later. But yeah, but that was the first anime series, and it kind of took me off guard. Like I thought it would be relatively newer, but no, 1963 was the first anime showing in America, the first shonen anime anyway.
It's so fascinating also when you talk about you basically marathoning the Dragon Ball franchise and really getting it under your belt from a more recent time in your life. Whereas myself and I'm sure many other fans experienced it, as more of a nostalgic uh, point in our lives. And that's really where it holds up for me as far as the entire franchise is concerned. One thing I do want to ask you though is what are your thoughts after having finally seen the whole spectrum, at least the original series, and then watching Z? Do you have a preference between either the original or Z, or does it particularly matter to yourself?
Man, that's hard because if I were to put it in a rank, Dragon Ball Z probably wouldn't be in my top five of my favorite anime just because there's so much new stuff that's fantastic, but it's still good for what it is. If I were to choose between the two, and that's tough because overall, I feel Dragon Ball is the most put together in a very, very streamlined way. But there are some moments in Dragon Ball Z where it's like stuck with me ever since watching it. I talk about this the other day. It's like and we'll talk about this more later, is the scene with Gohan fighting Cell. Just that passing of the torch that it was supposed to be, and like I said, we'll talk about that later. The passing of the torch that it was supposed to be, just like I was pumped. I was like, yes, that's it. And that's one of my favorite scenes is when, Cell comes back, Gohan's like, oh, I got to fight him again. And then he's like doing the final Kamehameha. And then Goku's like, you've got to do it. And then you see the spirit of him behind Gohan. It's just that scene always just pumps me up. Like you said, it gets the blood flowing. There's stuff that just happens, and you're like, yeah. So, leading into my next question, though, what was your very first shonen anime experience?
Now, that is an interesting one because when I was doing a little bit of my research as well, I was trying to find a few different title examples to sort of, help get in the mindset and everything. I found that when I was researching some different titles that are considered shonen, I found that evidently many, I found that evidently many series in the Gundam franchise are considered shonen titles as well. And I can still remember when I was about 7 seeing Mobile Suit Gundam Wing when it first came on Cartoon Network in about 2000ish, something like that. And my mind was just completely blown. Giant robots in space. Instantly, I was there. I was just there completely 100%. And I still, to this day, do remember seeing it for the first time. It was a very, very sort of seminal moment for me as a fan of animation in general, you know? So I
You
can
know,
still very much remember that.
Yeah, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but it's
No, you're
funny
fine.
that you bring up that series because it is considered a shonen series,
Mhm.
but I think it is very underrated. I mean, a lot of people loved it. I remember in high school watching it. A lot of people loved it at the time, but you do not hear it talked about like Dragon Ball Z is today. And I'm curious, like, there's not a lot of big mobile suit style shows today. And I really think we should bring it back because I loved Mobile Suit Gundam. That was one of my first experiences with watching a whole series. That was probably the second series that I watched entirely as it came out. But you're right, dude. There's something about big robots battling each other that is just like fuels the adrenaline.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I like to think that hopefully it's kind of cyclical. You know, I mean, we may be experiencing a bit of a dry spell with giant robot series becoming, you know, the next big thing at the moment, but I'm hoping that it'll recycle again to where we'll be able to have, you know, this new explosion of giant robot series. I would love that so much.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm with you on that. All right, so here we go. I was doing some research looking for the top 5 shonen anime right now. Just in the history of shonen anime, what's the top 5 most viewed? And I would like to hear what you have to guess. Was starting at number 5. What do you think the 5th one being? And then I'll read you the list of what they had.
Oh gosh. Oh, that is tough. That is very, very, very difficult because there's so much stuff.
Or maybe here we go. How about
Yeah,
let's go? Should we do 5 through 1 or 1 through 5?
let's do 5 through 1.
5
Let's
through
let's
1.
count it
Okay.
down. Yes, I agree.
Here, I'll even write what you say.
Okay. Okay. Just let me know when you're ready.
All right, I'm ready.
Okay. 5. Let's go with Hunter x Hunter for 5. For 4, I suppose. Yeah, why not? Let's just throw Astro Boy out there. Just to give it another historical shout out.
There we go.
Number 3. Top 3 is going to be difficult. That's what's going to be really tough. For number 3, gosh, I'm trying to think of something. I'll tell you what, we'll go with Yu Yu Hakusho for number 3. And then number 2, and again, I'm just trying to ballpark it as best I can. But for number 2,
that's the joy of this.
exactly.
Yeah.
Number 2, we'll go with Fist of the North Star, and then number 1, Dragon Ball.
Okay. To reiterate, for 5, you have Hunter x Hunter.
Yes.
Which is funny because you have Togashi, which don't even get me started on him right now. I love him, but Togashi and I have a love-hate relationship, and we'll get to that more. All right, so 5, you have Hunter x Hunter. 4, you have Astro Boy. 3, you have Yu Yu Hakusho. 2, you have Fist of the North Star, and 1, you have Dragon Ball Z, that series.
Yeah.
Are you ready?
Let's hear it.
So number 5, and we'll talk about some of these shows individually just on tangents, but here we go. Number 5.
Okay.
One Piece.
Oh boy.
You know, One Piece gets really good after episode 5,967. 4. And I haven't seen this one. I've heard about it. I haven't seen it, and I've heard all good things. I just might need to take a weekend and binge it.
Yeah.
Number 4, we have Magi, Labyrinth of Magic.
I have heard of that one too. I have heard good things about that one too. I can't claim to be an authority on it either, but I can say I have heard some pretty good things on it. From what I've heard, it kind of takes a sort of Arabian Nights kind of feel thing. I could be completely wrong because I don't know anything about it, but that's just kind of the general aesthetic I've heard about it.
Yeah, so I need to check that one out. Okay, number 3, Hunter x Hunter. You had it on your list, but not at number 3.
Right.
Number 2, I was surprised that this was number 2. Number 2 is Full Metal Alchemist, Brotherhood.
That I can picture because that's a really, when you talk to Full Metal Alchemist fans and Brotherhood fans in general, they are very, very passionate about that series.
And I've seen it. It's really good. I just didn't think it had that much of a following.
Yeah.
In terms of just the shonen community.
Right.
All right. So number 1. For the most popular shonen anime is Yu Yu Hakusho.
Really?
Yes.
That's so awesome.
Guess where Dragon Ball Z is on that list?
Where does it rank on this list?
Number 6. It's outside of the top 5, which is completely crazy to me.
That's amazing. If you don't mind me asking, where'd you find that list? That sounds like a really interesting list.
All right. So it's on, and I mean, this is just a generic website. Kind of, yeah. And it was just something that I was like, okay, that has the most views. CBR.com.
I've heard of them before. They're a good website.
It was like the 15 best shonen anime ever.
Very interesting. Very cool.
So we have Black Clover at 15, Attack on Titan at 14.
Okay.
Code Geass, Bleach, And that's just some of the other ones. Seven Deadly
Right,
Sins,
right.
fairy tales on here.
Yeah.
My Hero, of
Just
course,
for
is on there.
yeah, just for our listeners, we are going to eventually have an episode where we talk about series we can't stand.
Hmm.
That will be an episode in the future.
Right.
But no, that's fascinating that they put Dragon Ball outside of the top 5. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and I honestly think it has to be because of the filler,
Hmm.
and I'm this way with Bleach. I've tried watching Bleach. I can't necessarily do it just because there's some episodes that you spend 30 minutes and nothing happens. And I mean, even though I love Dragon Ball Z, you have to admit that there's some stuff that you're just like, oh boy, nothing has happened in this episode.
And I will say also, as a Bleach fan, yeah, that's pretty much it. That pretty much nails it.
So that leads us into our next topic of conversation. What is your favorite shonen series? Would you say it's Mobile Suit or would you say it's something else?
I mean, you know me, you know how it's so difficult to try and
Tell us a
pick
favorite.
a certain favorite. There's something that you can say is number one for yourself, but one show that I have, one show and manga franchise that I am a big fan that is very widely influential, but I think still deserves a lot of credit is this series called Saint Seiya. It was a shonen series that was out in the 80s. Is very much of its time. It's an action series where you have the protagonists fighting against bad guys. There's no necessarily life altering twists in the storyline or anything like that. But one thing I love about it is that it incorporates Greek mythology into the world building. And so every protagonist or antagonist has a suit of armor that gives them their abilities and their powers, and they're all based off of either some character in Greek mythology or a constellation, the name of a constellation. And it ultimately it helped start a subgenre of sort of armored warriors where the character's equipment help give them their abilities. Like I said, it's a very standard battle against evil plot. The characters will shout out their different attacks as they're getting ready to fight. But if you're somebody who just enjoys action in general, it's pretty hard to not enjoy this series in general. And I will say what's interesting is that Taika Kubo, the author and illustrator of Bleach, he actually lists it as a primary influence for his art and his storytelling. And Bleach is another favorite of mine, even though it does have, some weaknesses, like you mentioned, but it can still be a very enjoyable action series in its own right. So I would have to put Saint Seiya as one of the ones that I particularly enjoy and very much a seminal title if you are at all interested in going back to the 80s and the era of when shonen really sort of ruled the airwaves and ruled the manga publications. What about yourself, my friend?
All right. So my favorite, just for being, and we'll talk about this here in a little bit, so I won't go into
Mhm.
too much detail since we're going to be talking about it our next
Right.
couple episodes. My all-time favorite would be Yu Yu Hakusho, just
Yes.
because that one was the most like it's not even condensed. It's 120 episodes. It doesn't drag out, but it's not too short either. But are you ready for one of my guilty pleasure shonen episodes or animes?
Let's hear
Yu-Gi-Oh.
it.
So I read that Yu-Gi-Oh is a type of shonen anime.
Okay.
And once I read that, I was like, I have to incorporate it because if I don't, then I'm doing it injustice. There's something about, and it's not even good, or it might be good. It's just not great. Like, you know what you're getting.
Yeah.
You're getting the cheesy 2 character transformation, all about shonen, and just the theme song, the duels, you're bringing cards to life. It's just so absurd,
and
but
and
it's
give it
so good.
and give a shout out to Four Kids for that legendary dub. I mean,
Yeah, honestly, it's not bad dubbed. Like, the
no,
dub is not bad.
it's not. Yeah.
I remember every Saturday morning, WB watching Yu-Gi-Oh,
Oh yeah.
Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, and then I was like,
Right there with you.
this is one of my favorites. It's just
Hmm.
so easy to like. You
Hmm.
laugh at it, but you enjoy it because of what it is.
Exactly. You take it at face value.
Right.
And that's really some of the best shonen series. That's what you've got to do with them. You just have to take them at face value, not necessarily get any kind of, major meaning out of them or anything of that nature. Just take it at face value and just enjoy it for what it is.
Absolutely. All right, so let's dive in. We've
Mm,
got the three major influences of shonen anime that we're going to be talking about today.
hmm.
Fist of the North Star, which is written by none other than,
Tetsuo Hara and Brunson.
and guess who they influenced?
Who did that, my friend?
Araki.
Yeah, hang on,
Hirohiko
I'll check.
Araki. How how much better can that get? Then we'll talk about Dragon Ball. We've got
Mm.
Dragon Ball on the list, which basic like that's one of the most popular. If you were to say what's a shonen anime, you go Dragon Ball. Then we'll talk about Yu Yu Hakusho and Hunter x Hunter. Let's start with Fist of the North Star. That's in your wheelhouse. I haven't really checked it out too much. You've done a lot more research about it. What is it about, my friend? What is it? Why does it make the list of being one of your most influential shonen shows?
I tell you what, buddy, it's very interesting to sort of look back on a title like Fist of the North Star now, because compared to different series that we've experienced from just say the past 10 years, the plot of Fist of the North Star is actually kind of bare bones, to put it kind of mildly. Think of it as a combination of Mad Max with Bruce Lee as the main character. You're dealing with a post-apocalyptic world that's mostly desert. Society has broken down. I believe it takes place after a nuclear war. And you have this young warrior named Kinshiro who is a master in this special form of martial arts known as Hokuto Shinken, which allows him to not only beat the living crap out of his enemies, but he's also able to find the different pressure points on the bodies and actually make his enemies explode into a very bloody pile of gore.
That sounds so fun.
And it's and he essentially goes around protecting the weak from these, for the most part, these evil biker gangs that sort of roam the wastes and control them. He gets a couple of different allies that are mostly kind of kids. And that's essentially what he does for, I believe the manga was published for about 5 years throughout the 80s. And it just became this incredibly influential work. Like you were saying, I will note also that if any of our listeners are not necessarily into the sort of more gory elements of anime or manga, this might not necessarily be the franchise for you, because in practically every episode or chapter, Kinshiro ends up just destroying like 5 or 6 different bad guys, even though he's the main protagonist and hero of the story. He has a very significant body count, we'll put it that way. And what's interesting is that when I was looking up some general information about the series, is that it actually is one of the highest grossing media franchises of all time. Evidently, at least according to one source I was able to find, it's grossed over $20 billion worth of sales because of the manga itself, the anime, just different stuff like that. And like you said, also big influence on the next generation of authors and illustrators. Araki, like you were mentioning, also not to mention the late great Kentaro Miura, rest in peace, author of one of my all-time favorite comics, Berserk. He listed them as his main primary influence. So just in general, a terrific action ride if you're into it, and if you're interested in watching one of the, aside from Dragon Ball, one of the most influential titles when we talk about modern action fiction, just in general.
Yeah, you talked about like that element that gets me is the whole destroying the enemy every episode. How would you say that that show in terms of combat? Because one of the big things in shonen, it's the fighting scene. We live for a good brawl. What did Fist of the North Star do well in that aspect?
I think one of the most interesting elements of it is that when Kenshiro actually begins fighting opponents, is that he'll sort of rain upon them these different flurries of blows, mostly punches, different things like that. But he'll also do it in a very concise and controlled manner. He won't necessarily be. This isn't a series where you just spend 10 or 15 pages watching energy blasts go from one opponent to the other. It's very precise, I suppose, is the word I could use best. And more often than not, his opponents think he's just slightly tapped them or something like that, where in actuality, he's hit one of their pressure points and they only have a few seconds left to live. So they will oftentimes just go into this huge spray of matter and things like that. So it's very unique, and you can tell really sort of preceded the sort of ultra violent phase that went on in the industry in the late 80s and the early 90s, when it was really starting to be seen over here on our side of the pond as well.
Yeah. So you'd say it focused more on it was a more focused fighting experience for each fight that came about, if I'm saying
Exactly.
that right.
Exactly. And plus Kenshiro is also he's also one of those characters who doesn't necessarily get hurt particularly often, and always make sure to let his opponents know that they're dead as soon as they as soon as they realize what's going to happen to them.
You have 5 seconds to live. Here you go.
Basically.
That's awesome. Well,
Yes.
thank you for that. I mean,
That,
I need to check it out. I
it's
know
great.
I haven't been the best at checking out that part of the anime, so I'll definitely be checking that out soon.
It's great, and it's not necessarily like we were talking about earlier, it's not necessarily deep, quote unquote. It's just a very enjoyable series. So,
Hmm.
mhm,
Well, and that brings us into our next, which I think you see that influence in our next topic of Dragon Ball.
mhm,
The fight scenes being very, very, there's not a lot of group fights
mhm,
in Dragon Ball or Dragon Ball Z. For those of you wondering, Dragon Ball is a story written by Akira Toriyama that started in 1984, and it's still going now with Dragon Ball Super. You have the three major ones, which is Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, and then Dragon Ball Super. You have Kai and GT, but those are more extended universe, if I were to put it in layman's terms. I think Dragon Ball, even so, with Fist of the North Star, was a big turning point for Shonen Anime. And here's a list of the different effects it had on Shonen Anime that it really introduced, and you see this even today, is you have transformations. You have major transformations, and I'll talk about more of these in detail. You have transformations, then you have like the training. You have these like training montages or these training series where you see the different forms of training that these warriors go through. And then you have fan service, which I will discuss that in detail. And even more than that, video games. It's like Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat, you had the 2D fighting that changed the game, but then you had Dragon Ball Z, which turned the point of 3D arena fighters. But starting on the transformations, this is obviously the most notable of Dragon Ball, of Dragon Ball Z, of Dragon Ball Super. And going into detail, the first transformation that you see with Dragon Ball is Goku being a young boy at this time. As he's getting more powerful, he turns into the great ape. And Gohan does it too in Dragon Ball Z. You see that transformation. That was like the big major, like, this character is going into a different being and becoming even more powerful. But what's awesome about it, though, is when they turn into this beast, they almost lose inhibition, or their prohibitors are dulled to where they just wreak destruction. And that was the main transformation of Dragon Ball. And that was one of the coolest parts. I remember seeing it for the first time going, it's like you said, the blood pumping, like, yeah, he turned into a monkey. And then as we get into Dragon Ball and then now Dragon Ball Z, you have the Kamehameha, which is one of the most iconic power
At-
moves.
attacks
Attack,
and
yeah, that anybody could see. I remember working in the bar and grill one time. We have those doors that like the saloon doors that go
mhm,
back and forth. It
right.
was a Sunday and it was very dead, like very quiet. And just goofing around with one of my buddies. we're big Dragon Ball Z nerds. I just stood in the back of the kitchen behind it going, Kame, Hame, ha. And I remember just like blasting these doors open with my like my hands in the Kamehameha wave style.
That's awesome.
And thinking that the restaurant was empty, we had a table of like 6, and it was a family. And I scared the crap out of them. And I was like, I am so sorry. But
Oh
go,
man.
yeah, but it's one of the most iconic attack moves ever.
Right.
So that's one of the other transformations. And I know I'm going into detail with this, but I think the transformations are really key on how Shonen has developed. Goku versus Piccolo, very final of Dragon Ball, sorry. The transformation's not there, but you see that he's elevated his power level. It doesn't happen until Dragon Ball Z where you get the really intense power level changes. The first fight being Goku and Raditz, right? Goku being who he is, the antagonist of Shonen, which is like, I want to be more powerful than I am now. And you see that with every season or every part. So Goku versus Raditz, you have Piccolo's
Special
beam cannon. That's right.
Right.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And then
Mhm.
actually, it was the episode with Vegeta and Nappa that we see Goku use Kaioken. And what it does is he gets bigger, muscly. He just becomes this big buff dude, gets the red aura around him, and he's like, I am all powerful. But the problem with that is that his speed suffered. And so I think if you were to look at it, Toriyama took that and was like, how do I make this better? So then you have the ultimate Goku versus Frieza. And this is where you see Super Saiyan. And I remember seeing this for the first time over the course of 20 episodes because it took them that long.
Yeah.
All joking aside, it was one of the coolest experiences because it's the first time that you see a character go from getting his butt whooped all the time to now he is the ultimate being. And that's what Shonen is this transformation to the ultimate being. And then, of course, one of my favorite transformations of all time, and this will be the last that I talk about the transformations in terms of Dragon Ball Z. My favorite transformation of all time is when Goku goes Super Saiyan 3 against Majin Buu.
That's a good one.
The 3 minutes, and that was the coolest part, is it only took 3 minutes. And you see like the effects that it had on the earth, like you see all the wind gusts and everything. But then he like transforms and he's got the long hair, the no eyebrows. I can relate to that with my non-existent eyebrows. Maybe that's just me being Super Saiyan. I have no eyebrows. But I remember seeing that going, no way is there something past Super Saiyan 2.
Right.
And then I was like, frick yeah, like, oh, I was so pumped. I was like screaming. I was probably eating cereal or something like at the table.
And for anybody who's curious, that's one of the only high points of the Majin Buu saga.
And the Majin Buu saga was where it really kind of declined because there was a lot of stuff that just, it went really well, it didn't go really well. I think the Cell saga being my most favorite arc of anime, I think that was when Dragon Ball Z was at its peak.
Yeah.
Dragon Ball Super is good too.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of animation, Dragon Ball Super is stud at animation. It's so much cleaner, smoother. Fight scenes are 10 times better. But we have to give credit where credit's due with Dragon Ball Z. Then that leads me into my next kind of segue for this discussion is the training montages. So in Dragon Ball Z, in Dragon Ball, you had Master Roshi leading Goku through being powerful. But then you have now that Goku is full grown, how's he getting powerful? Of course, technology is superb at this time. They've developed a gravity chamber. So now he gets to train in 10 times the Earth's gravity or certain times more than the Earth's gravity. But what he really does is he dies and goes to King Kai's world. And then since that gravity is so much more, he's training under King Kai.
And I think that's one of the best things that Toriyama did with the whole series is he made sure to let the protagonist and the audience know that becoming more powerful and taking on bigger threats is very much a process. So I think having Goku experience this training, this periodic episodes of training, is really one of the more underrated elements that Toriyama brings to the table with that series.
Well, it's because we talk about, and some shows do this really poorly, is there's no risk when we battle. When the main character is going to win, just because time and time again it's fairy tale. you know, and I hate to dog on fairy tale, but there's just no risk to it. It's always
Oh,
like the protagonist is going to do something. Whereas when Dragon Ball Z came out and you saw Goku die, you thought that was it. You were like, oh my God,
you
what
really did.
is happening?
Hmm.
Well, rewatching it now, you're like, oh, I know he comes back, so it's not a big deal. But even at the time, could you imagine like one of the key characters? It's like Game of Thrones right now. We'll talk about that later, but the main character dies. And you're
Hmm.
like,
This shouldn't be happening.
this shouldn't be happening. And then you talked about the majesty of the Dragon Balls. They have to find the Dragon Balls, and that kind of keeps the system going. One of my favorite training experiences with Dragon Ball Z, though, is the hyperbolic time chamber. Whereas one day out here brings us a year in the time chamber. That's awesome. In Toriyama, like you said, Toriyama does a great job showing us that it takes a lot to train for these fights, and that there's more of a discipline to it rather than you just get stronger. And I remember in the Cell games, like they have to go to the time chamber. They have to go to the time chamber. Him and Goku and Gohan both train for days. I think it was like a total of 3 days, and it ended up being like 3 years.
Right.
And that led to my favorite scene in Dragon Ball history, which is Gohan fighting Cell. Then, of course, I have to bring this up is the fan service that Toriyama did. And I don't blame him in a way. I do. It's a lose lose, really, because I think what was supposed to happen was Gohan take the reins from Goku. He becomes the Earth's protector. He's the one that leads, because I can argue about this all day. Gohan was stronger than Goku was, hands down, during the Cell fight. But
I'd agree
then
with you there.
they turned him. Toriyama was like, no, Goku is so loved, which I do love Goku. But Gohan was supposed to be the successor. And then they turn him into this, I mean, for lack of better terms, nerdy, like crime fighter that barely could go Super Saiyan when he was fighting Majin Buu. And then that whole training of Majin Buu being the villain and then Gohan unlocking his potential only to get beaten in a second. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that was one of the downfalls of Dragon Ball Z to me.
And I know we'll talk about this at some point, but it also leads to the question of, when do you think a series has been going on for too long? When do you think it's past the peak of being really genuinely good? And I'm sure that will be the whole concept of Dragon Ball in general will come up whenever we decide to take on that topic more in depth.
Yeah. I mean, to just touch on that a little bit, I have a friend who has watched and read all of One Piece, like kept up with it from young. He's been with it forever.
Wow.
And he's like, there's never a dull moment in One Piece. It's more of, and we'll talk about this when I talk about Jujutsu Kaisen, is it's more of, instead of the MacGuffin, the treasure being the main focal point of the show, it's all the events leading up to it. And it's just like when we talk about JoJo too, it's not necessarily the end result, it's this journey there.
Right.
The last thing I'll touch about Dragon Ball Z is the influence on video games. Because before it was Mortal Kombat, and I might have said this earlier, before it was like Mortal Kombat was the 2D fighter, that was the main turning point of fighting video games, right? Would you say that's kind of the
No, I would agree with that. Yeah, I would
popular
agree.
opinion? That and
Hmm.
Street Fighter,
Yeah.
those two
Yeah.
always battle each other.
Right.
I think Dragon Ball Z did a great job on influencing the 3D battle arena style game, because I would play Dragon Ball Z Budokai 3 religiously because it was so different. It was a fighting game that actually took a little bit of more than just remembering combos. It was like, how do you go about fighting a certain enemy? I
Hmm.
mean, which I'm sure Mortal Kombat is. I've just never been good at Mortal Kombat.
I will say from at least for myself, when it comes to the Dragon Ball Z games, I never played them myself, but you were always aware of them. You
Hmm.
know, you could always just immediately pick them out if you were going to the rent video store to rent something or something like that. But
Yeah.
you were always, if you hadn't played them, you were always at the very least aware of them, which,
Yeah. And there's better Dragon Ball Z games. Like that was just one of my personal favorites
right.
because now you have the Xenoverse games, which are really fun to play. They're
Hmm.
kind of an open world Dragon Ball game. I wish we would have a true open world Dragon Ball Z game. That would be so much fun.
It would.
I know that's probably going to be in the sphere of very expensive. Yeah, boy can dream, right?
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
here's the thing, and you'll agree with me on this one. The best thing to come out of Dragon Ball Z abridged.
Unquestionably. And it's not even close.
That's one of the funniest things. Like people are so creative
Hmm.
on how they make a mock of shonen. Like the best thing to come out of shonen is people making fun of shonen. And
Hmm.
of course, we can say we love that because we love shonen, but we love when people make fun of it because we know what it is.
And one of the best things about it is that it's so much a labor of love for these
Mhm.
series as well. Because you wouldn't be working so hard to edit, script, and just in general parody a series if you didn't have that genuine affection for it. And that's what so many of these abridged series are about. It's showing genuine affection for these titles, so much so that you want to make fun of them as well in
Mhm.
a good-hearted nature.
Because there's always an abridged series every time. It never fails to sit there and make me laugh.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's my rant. Not rant. That's my speech on Dragon Ball Z. This leads us to our next, and I think just as influential show in terms of the shonen series that we've talked about is Yu Yu Hakusho, because that's going to be something we talk about in the next episode. We'll focus more on just Yu Yu. But in terms of the shonen influence, I feel like Yu Yu Hakusho does it very, 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 very well.
I would agree with you there. And one of the great things about it is that it's not necessarily a MacGuffin driven series. You know, every time that a story arc occurs, it's not necessarily because they're trying to find a set of Dragon Balls or some sort of massive secret object. They go more of against the forces of evil route, which to me can often be more interesting if we're talking about series like this. So
Mhm.
right off the bat, then and there, it makes it just a little bit on a higher level
Right.
than other titles.
Well, it's funny because you say that whole it's not about the MacGuffin because it's so funny because every time something happens, Yusuke is inconvenienced. You know what I mean? Like this very start, and for our listeners who don't know, Yusuke Urameshi in Yu Yu Hakusho, the first episode he dies. And you're
Mhm.
like, how are they what? They're gonna what do you mean they're killing this guy? And it's just a punk kid. And he's like inconvenienced every time he has to do something. So he gets his life back. He does that whole ordeal. And I think those tests are phenomenally written because it's like it's showing growth, but he's also still a kid. You know what I mean?
Yes, and this is something that for our listeners who don't know, Tagashi, the author of Hunter x Hunter, is also the author of Yu Yu Hakusho. And one of the things that he does best as an author is that he's able to show the progression and the growth of his characters. You see Yusuke start out as this punk delinquent in the very beginning of the series. And then throughout the rest of the entire series, we see Yusuke evolve into a man and ultimately a good hearted person, which he was in secret at the beginning. But by the end of the series, he's able to be very, very open about how good of a person he's become.
Yeah, and I will say Tagashi does that very well. He takes a character and he develops them subtly and to where the internal becomes the external by the end of it. But also his character changes. And we'll talk about this more with Hunter x Hunter like later on down the road. Yusuke becomes externally caring for compassionate, I guess is what I would say. To go more on the shonen side of things, the story itself is shonen. He becomes powerful, he develops the spirit gun. He has to fight baddies, he becomes the spirit detective, which fights the baddies, right?
With his group of friends.
With his group of friends, right? It's a group of friends fighting injustices for the valiant. What's funny is Togashi writes it so well that you think these instances are an inconvenience to him. And you're like, this kid is just thrown into the worst situations ever.
Oh, gotta go save the world again. Great.
Right. And we talked about this with Dragon Ball Z, but the transformations themselves are different. If something happens, there's no transformation to the next power level. The first one, besides Yusuke developing the spirit gun, the main transformation doesn't happen until the Dark Tournament, which is like 3 seasons into the show. And that's when he faces his test.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the main body transformation that you see with like Dragon Ball Z or something would be Kurama. Kurama goes from his human self to his demon form. And that's really the only transformation you see out of the group of friends
Mm-hmm.
in the show.
Pretty much.
Until very later when Yusuke reveals that he's also part demon.
Right.
Which
we'll get into that later.
Yeah. The powers are different. We talked about the spirit gun, but you also have Kuwabara, which is arguably one of the most comic relief characters ever.
I will also add a comic relief character in the series who's actually funny.
You're right. Something that's like, it's a good dynamic. Develops the spirit sword. He feels that he's spirit aware. He's aware of different spirits. Hiei is a demon. His power, I guess, would be his Jigan Eye.
Mm-hmm.
He also summons the Dragon of the Darkness Flame.
Mm-hmm.
But he's super fast. Like, that's his quality, is that he's super quick.
And I think that's one of the best things about Togashi's writing as well, is that he doesn't make anybody seem like they have the exact same abilities. He always makes sure that his main team is very rounded out in terms of different styles of battling an opponent.
Yeah, and one of the best things that he does is making sure that the powers aren't overpowered. Yusuke can only use a spirit gun at the beginning once a day.
And we actually see the heroes lose battles every once in a while as well, which is also very, very significant for this kind of genre.
And one of the best things is when you think they've won and really the next episode shows like, ooh, did they actually win? Because the fight with the Toguro brothers, the first one, when they fight the mafia, I forget his name off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
They battle all the demons in that mafia to rescue Hide's sister. They fight the Toguro brothers and win, quote unquote win, but the next episode reveals that they survived and it was a ploy.
Mm-hmm. And that's something else to kind of note, is that, this is a series where none of the main characters die or stay permanently dead, but at the same time, you can be genuinely concerned about what's going to happen to them from one episode to the next.
Absolutely right. It's a great series, and like I said earlier, it's only 120 episodes, so it doesn't overstay its welcome. It doesn't drag it up. There's not a lot of filler. Everything's pacing very well, and that's one thing I'd say. That's probably why Yu Yu Hakusho is #1 on CBR's top 15 shonen list, is because it's succinct enough without being too short and cramming a bunch of stuff in small seasons, but it's not 400 episodes long to where there's a bunch of filler in between each major event. So I would agree Yu Yu Hakusho is one of the most influential.
And it's aged very well as well. One thing you have to note with a lot of these sort of golden era series is that they are very much products of their time.
Oh, absolutely.
When it comes to Togashi's works, they have much more of a timeless quality to them.
Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. Do you have any other final thoughts on the shonen style before we kind of wrap things up? Because we've really talked about a lot in this episode. What do you think? Where do you think we are at with shonen right now? I guess that's what. How about this? We'll wrap it up on that. What are our final thoughts? Like, where is shonen at today? What are some of your more recent shonen series?
I think where we're at today, I think we're in a very good spot as far as this genre is concerned. There's such a massive well of content to be consumed for people who are at all interested in checking this stuff out. So I think my final word would have to be just look it up, see what a lot of people are saying are among the best titles in this genre, and just dive in because there's a lot to go through. There's a lot to go through.
I agree. And you can never go wrong with the more popular ones. People will make fun of whatever fandoms, but I mean, you have things like My Hero, Attack on Titan, like those are the big shonen series right now. My favorite, more recent shonen, though, is Jujutsu Kaisen. It won Anime of the Year in 2020 for good reason. We'll talk about that more later, but I think
Very
we're
enjoyable.
yeah, and I think we're in a good spot with technology. Animation starting to become cleaner, and I think it's just we're downhill from here. And I think we're in a good spot.
Yes, couldn't agree more.
Well, everyone, that's our final thoughts on the genre of shonen anime. It's been a very, very important part of our passions for developing this podcast. I think if you would agree, if we didn't have shonen anime, we wouldn't be here right now.
Absolutely.
And I think we're on to the next one with Yu Yu Hakusho. We'll develop more of the story and really get into it more so than we did today. But everyone, thanks for joining us. We've really appreciated you listening and supporting us. And we hope to see you next time on the show, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you for listening to the Show Guys podcast. The show's theme music is composed by DJ Mead. You can find his latest album, Mad World Reimagined, and other works on Spotify and iTunes, and follow him on Facebook at DJ Mead Music 777. Thank you again for listening. Have a terrific day.